the effect of recent solar activity. Solar activity causing satellites to sink back towards the Earth, and this, of course, could destroy them. An increase in solar activity is causing satellites to sink into lower orbits and risk destruction by falling into the atmosphere, experts have warned. We saw this happen with the SpaceX satellites a couple of months ago. Satellites in low Earth orbit face drag from residual atmosphere, and it acts to slow the spacecraft down. This causes a reduction in altitude, and if it's unchecked, this orbital decay, quote unquote, forces craft back into the atmosphere, at which point they typically burn up during re-entry. For this reason, for example, the International Space Station, the ISS, is forced to regularly undertake so-called reboosting maneuvers to keep it orbiting at a height of around 250 miles above the Earth's surface. The European Space Agency ESA swarm of satellites is a constellation of 3 satellites placed in polar orbits to study the strength, direction, and variation of the Earth's magnetic field. Late last year, ESA operators found the satellites were sinking into lower Earth orbits, approaching the atmosphere at an unusual rapid rate, some 10 times faster than before. Swarm mission manager and ionospheric physicist Dr. Anja Strom told Space.com that it's in the last 5 years, the satellites were sinking about 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles every year. But since December of last year, they've been virtually diving. The sink rate between December and April has been 20 kilometers or 12 miles a year. That's almost 10 times as fast for some odd reason. The change in the orbital decay of the swarm satellites coincided, the experts said, with the onset of the latest solar cycle. Each of the sun cycles lasts 11 years, solar activity in each cycle building to a peak, during which the star's magnetic poles flip, followed by ramping down period before the next cycle begins. Astronomers began numbering solar cycles in 1775, when extensive monitoring of solar activity first began, and we're presently in solar cycle 25, and is proving to be more active than both its relatively sleepy predecessor and experts' forecasts. So as solar activity increases, so does the solar wind and the corresponding atmospheric drag left at orbital altitudes. So accordingly, researchers believe that the next few years may well prove difficult for the spacecraft placed in orbit around our planet. Dr. Strom said there's a lot of complex physics that we'll still don't fully understand going into the upper layers of the atmosphere where it interacts with the solar wind. He says we know that this interaction causes an upwelling of the atmosphere. It means that the denser air all shifts upwards to the higher altitudes. This density increase, even if minor in the grand scheme of things, is nevertheless enough to increase atmospheric drag and increase the rate of orbital decay of the satellites. Dr. Strom said it's almost like running with the wind against you. It slows the satellite down, and when they slow down, they sink. Needless to say, the ESA instructed the swarm satellites to fire their onboard propulsion back in May, forcing them to return them into their previous higher altitudes. Not all satellites have been so lucky, though, with Elon Musk SpaceX having lost a batch of 40 brand new Starlink communication satellites when the solar storm pushed them into lower orbits, and ultimately to their destruction, they burnt up in the atmosphere. Ordinarily, Starlink craft orbit at a high enough altitude that a solar storm would not have such a fatal effect, but they are deployed from Falcon 9 rockets at a lower altitude and later raised to a higher level by their onboard propulsion systems, leaving them at risk from space weather at an early stage. So according to Dr. Strom, all the craft that occupy orbital altitudes of about 250 miles are likely to face similar problems in this new period of solar activity, with those built to economical designs that don't have propulsion units like the so-called CubeSats being particularly vulnerable. These craft, she said, don't have ways to get up. That basically means that they will have a shorter lifetime in orbit. They will re-enter sooner than they would during the solar minimum, she said. This is on Express UK by Ian Randall. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.